All right. What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Systems of Wealth podcast. I am your host, No Kronfly. I am very excited for the podcast today, not only because I'm repping a beard for the very first time, but I am joined by a very special guest, someone who is, well, just a few doors down from me as of we speak right now in the same office, but someone that is a long-time client, mentor, most importantly, a friend. It is the all-powerful Josh Lewis. Josh, thank you so much for joining me today, my friend.
No, we're happy to be here. I want to see what you're doing here with this podcast and sharing people systems of wealth.
Absolutely.
I want to get in on this.
Well, I'm very excited. I mean, honestly, you are a big inspiration for me even starting this podcast. And I do want to just start off simply by saying thank you. You are someone that took a chance on me as a young 19-year-old when I was just getting started. So without you, I wouldn't have this type of opportunity now. You've stuck with me through the pandemic, through my move to Vegas, through my move to Texas, to Philly, back from Philly, when I got cut out of a business by a business partner. You continue to be a very big part of my foundation as an entrepreneur. And I don't get the chance to say thank you a lot. And so I just want to express my immense gratitude for you and having you as part of my life. So again, truly, truly thank you.
You are very welcome, but don't forget you also left out a whirlwind romance in there that we went through.
Indeed.
The beginning, the middle, and the end, all of
Goodness.
that. So
Indeed. Yeah.
our young man is growing into an older man right in front of our eyes.
Indeed. And I got the beard to prove it. And quite honestly, I mean, like, the other thing I wanted to say thank you for is like getting to work with you. You have provided me an environment and a vehicle through BuyWise that allows me to have a job and an opportunity that I get to engage in. I'm curious about. It's fun for me. It's challenging for me. It's, getting to use all of the skills that I feel like I've cultivated and developed over the years. So, without the opportunity of getting to work with you, like I wouldn't get to say that I get to enjoy what I do every single day. So again, like can't express my gratitude enough for that.
It's a fun little laboratory, and that I like to ask questions. I like to think out loud, and so having another voice in the room, another brain to bounce things off of, we come up with lots of ideas. They're not all good ideas, but sometimes just getting them out in the world and talking about them, if not all the way taking them through to testing phase, we can determine whether they were actually valuable ideas or just experiments getting us to where we want to be. And the big thing, BuyWise, I still feel like we haven't found it yet. Like it's a big experiment. We're
Right.
trying jillions of things and we're getting closer and closer, but there's going to be a point where it all comes together. And I don't think
Clicks.
it's far off in the future, but
Right.
it comes back to that idea of just coming up with thoughts, ideas, knowing what we are and what our value is and what we're trying to get out into the world,
Yes.
and what are all of the tools that we have now to get that out there. And then most important, like it comes back to efficiency. What are the most efficient tools for getting that out there? Because we talk about all sorts of things. There's an endless quantity of rabbit holes that we could go down. It's figuring out
100%.
which ones are the right ones or the biggest payoff.
Right. 100%. Do you remember the very first time we met?
Well, I was sitting right there in that office there
Yes,
at
you
that
were.
time, and Shang came in with this great idea that you were running Facebook ads for Patriots and Paws, and wanted to see
Mhm.
what we could do for BuyWise.
Yep. Well, it's funny because I just bring it up because I remember you were sitting here and I was sitting there and I was quite intimidated because I knew you were operating at a level beyond what I could even comprehend at the time. But I remember we spent some time whiteboarding on the wall, and that's still continuously what we do almost every time we get together and chat and talk is whiteboarding our ideas out. So yeah, it's funny just to be sitting here now and talking to you. It's so cool.
Well, someday we'll grow up and we'll get it all figured out, and we'll look back and like remember all those tests and experiments and crazy ideas we had to go through before we actually figured out what we were doing.
Before it clicked. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a fun convo because you and I obviously don't get usually have like the time to have like a longer form conversation and kind of dig into some of these fun topics and, some of the different rabbit holes that I'm sure we'll get into in this conversation. But where I always like to start these interviews or these podcasts is with a pretty basic question. You might actually be able to answer it a little bit easier than some of the other people that I've talked to, but where I always like to start is usually like when people ask you what you do, what is it that you usually say?
Depends on who the person is and what level they're operating at. If it's a
100%.
borrower, funny, if it's a borrower, someone looking to borrow money to buy a home,
Yep.
to refinance a home, it's kind of a different conversation because they're looking for something different. But in simple terms, what we do is we help people integrate real estate into their long-term wealth building plan through optimized financing solutions. So it's a fancy way of saying efficiency in the borrowing process to acquire and control a leveraged asset, real estate, that its appreciation over time with that leverage will make a massive difference in your total lifetime wealth.
Yes. Oh, I love that 100%. And, a big part of like my own, how I sort of found real estate and mortgage on this niche was just like my own fascination around money and building wealth. And that was part of my attraction to, all of this was just we are having consistently conversations around the thing that I'm just most curious about, and that is wealth building. And I think it's a big interest of people that are going to be listening to this podcast is just that type of topic and how to be leveraging the different, like when we talk about systems of wealth, like the different things that go into it are, your income, your liquidity and cash on hand, your credit, managing debt, how to leverage liabilities versus assets and all of those things. So I definitely want to dive deep into sort of how that, real estate in a house and that purchase is going to play a role in building wealth over the long term. But take me back a little bit to like, I know you and I share sort of the experience of being a collegiate athlete, but how did you, like, where did your playing career, like, how did that play a role into then now finding yourself, kind of in this profession of, sort of mortgage and real estate?
So I played basketball at Eastern Washington University. My plan was to not get a job. I got a wonderful degree. It was paid for by someone else. That was
Yep.
fantastic.
Love that.
The plan was to go overseas and play basketball. And about 2-3 weeks after the season ended, we were playing pickup ball in the gym. And people find this hard to believe because 50-year-old Josh looks a little different than 22-year-old Josh. But one of my buddies wanted to see if I could dunk from the free throw line. So the answer is I could not, but we got really close, But in attempting to do it, I partially ruptured my patellar tendon. And it's a weird
Right.
injury in that if you fully rupture it, you're in big trouble. But
Right.
partial rupture, you're like, it doesn't feel right. That doesn't feel good at all. And it doesn't go away. There's no surgery for a partial tear. So what they say is go home, come back every 90 days, and we'll tell you whether it's healed itself or not.
Yeah.
So went home back here to Huntington Beach. So came home from Eastern Washington, came back to Huntington Beach, not able to play basketball, not able to do what I want to do. And after about 3.5, 4 months, my dad said, son, it's been wonderful having you home. I don't know that I'm getting a whole lot out of you laying on my couch all day. So if you can't play basketball, I do believe you're probably going to need to get a job. So talked to my grandma's husband, my step grandpa. He had been a realtor for 25, 30 years, realtor and real estate investor, probably more importantly. Between, say, 1975 and 1982, bought 80 to 100 units here in Huntington Beach, bought and sold. So that was a really interesting time. You hear about creative financing and all the cool things that used to happen pre-1982. And it was good being around him, learning from him. And what we decided that real estate wasn't the right side. I'm good with numbers, go into the mortgage finance. So my cousin was a processor. She got me a job as a loan officer. My mom had been a processor, so I kind of knew what went into it. The processor is the person that puts the file together. After your loan officer talks with you, figures out what loan program you're going on and gathers the information, they hand it over to the processor to pull the title work together, clear up credit supplements, order your appraisal, and submit it to the underwriter for approval and clearing conditions to get your docs out. So my mom had done that. My cousin had done that. And so she said, oh, I can get you a job. They have a call center. Then, we have a predictive dialer, which the funny thing, there was a room at the time. In the 90s, there was a room that contained this massive computer that was a predictive dialer. And they had another room full of cubicles, and you sat in the cubicle and it would dial people all day. They didn't want to talk to you.
Right. That was gonna be my question is like, where's those leads coming from? Like, how are you guys marketing at the time?
Title records. So you'd buy them from title companies and it would say, Noah lives at this address. This is his phone number. And he borrowed $112,000 4 years ago, likely interest rate 8%. And you would have one of those funky DOS screens that looks like what they use in war games, probably too old of a reference for you, but the little green, it's not even like a real computer monitor. And it would just pull up the data and all you could do is go through to the next call.
And just rip calls. Wow.
Thankfully I was tough. And I was good. So in 2 weeks, I got promoted. So the funny thing is, if you know anything about any of these boiler room call center type operations,
Mhm.
it is a very good first job for people out of recovery. So people that, alcohol recovery, drugs, whatever. So most of the folks in there did not come recently from college and college athletics. They had come from recovery.
Oh, wow. All right.
And so when it came time for a break, they would turn the dialer off and everyone would run to the door and start smoking out on the patio. And I would get as far away from the cloud of smoke as possible.
Right.
But after getting promoted in 2 weeks, all of these guys looked around and they're like, what in the hell? I've been doing
Yeah.
this for 2.5 years. I'm
Right.
better than that guy. And legit, several of the guys were way better on the phones than I was. They've been doing this for a long time. They had great
Right.
personality, really slick. And so they went to the owner and like, well, what's going on here? Why did this guy get promoted in 2 weeks? And they're like, well, you may or may not have noticed, but he comes in on time. He stays late. He wears a shirt and tie every day.
Right.
He learned all of the numbers and he has his license. Do any of you have your license? Do any of you come in anything other than shorts and a dirty t-shirt? No. Are you on time every day? And
The basics, basically. Yeah.
to these guys' credit, 2 or 3 of them immediately the following Monday came in a shirt and tie.
All right.
And started showing up on time and dressing for the job they wanted versus the one they have. And several of them did get promoted to being a loan officer. So for me, once I got into the loan officer seat and those guys were making the calls and making the introductions to me, and I started seeing what that company was doing, it really was, it was a really bad time in the mortgage industry where they were doing subprime loans, where you were going to people who really needed money badly and charging them way too much money for it. So after about 60 days of that, once I'm doing the numbers and I'm going, this is nuts. I talked to a lady in Buena Park that had owned her home free and clear. And there was a company back in the 90s, it's now out of business, thankfully, that ended up a big 2-hour 2020 special because they were doing this, just equity stripping.
Oh, wow.
I talked to this lady across the course of 3 refis and a little less than 3 years. She had gone from owning her home free and clear to owing $120,000 on maybe a $145,000 house at the time. And at that time, she couldn't borrow anymore because she had maxed out what was possible LTV wise. And she had paid about $60,000 in fees to get $60,000 in cash. So with that, you pretty quickly realize, yeah, this isn't for me. So I was lucky. One of my good friends from high school, her father was vice president of a real mortgage company that worked with realtors, helping people buy homes and doing normal, reputable loans, and got me in there. They put me at a desk at a Century 21 office. So I'm 22 years old. I've done about 4 loans in my life. And I'm sitting in a desk with experience, a top producing Century 21 office at the time, probably had 60 realtors, 10 or 12 who were pros doing a lot of volume.
Right.
The good news was they were really cool. They didn't start giving me loans right away, but they'd let me listen in. They'd let me ask questions. The other thing there at that time, my dad had bought me a laptop. This was funny. If I show you the computer, the computer was about 1/10 as powerful as my phone is right now. And about 900 times bigger. It was like 10 pounds, big fat thing. And it was color. That was a big thing. Color laptop. People were like, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So while I was not doing loans, sitting in the real estate office, pestering all the realtors, asking them questions about what they do, how it works, what's a contract, what's contingencies, all that fun stuff. We also did good faith estimates at the time. And we had these little duplicate forms, like you would write it in hand on the first page. They would make a copy. You'd keep one for your file. You give one for the borrower. Well, borrowers have a fun way of saying, well, what if instead of a $120,000 home, I buy a $130,000 home? What do those numbers look like? So I go, this is kind of silly. So taught myself Excel. Took that very simple little form, converted it into Excel so that in 2 seconds you change 120 to 130, hit print, and boom, now we have it.
Because I've seen, I mean, anybody listening, Josh and I get to work in Excel a lot, and he is a masterful pro. Like, it just blows me away, the formulas. And I had no idea it's been that long that you've had this skill in your back pocket. That's so cool.
I literally, in the 90s, I graduated in 95, you would take Information Sciences 101. And it was like, they would show you for 1 week, this is what a spreadsheet is.
It's so valuable.
This is what a Word doc is. So you had an idea of what it was, but I had never really deeply dug into it. And I said, here is how you teach yourself. You teach yourself vertical lookup. So I could make a table over here with all of the mortgage insurance factors, and I could change. So I set it up where there was like 8 fields that you would change, and it would calculate everything for you in 2 seconds. We'd print those out. So that was super valuable, helpful, useful for me because I learned the numbers. You can't program something to calculate the numbers for you unless you know the numbers like the back of your hand. So despite the fact
Yes.
that I didn't have any loans, I knew exactly how the numbers went
Wow.
into it. So pretty quickly, an agent gave me a deal. This was awesome. It was a $30,000 condo purchase in Southern California in 1990. Yes,
$30,000.
that was possible. The borrower
Crazy.
made $1,700 a month.
Okay.
He was a sports writer for a newspaper out in the Inland Empire.
Cool.
And crazy thing, I lost track of him. And about 7 or 8 years ago, I opened up the LA Times. Now he's a sports writer at the LA Times. And I'll bet you he
No
makes more
way.
than $1,700 a month. But that was my first loan. And again, it's just on the job
Wow.
training, learning. You've got to get in front of deals. So watching that and knowing that everyone in my
Mm.
family who had money, we have a lot of I don't know, no one in our family was poor, but we got a lot of middle class people, and then we got a
Yep.
handful of rich people in our family.
Mm.
All the rich people had a lot of real estate. So you
Hmm.
look around and you go, there's some sort of correlation there. And
Yep.
you know that I hammer on this hard all the time. 12, 15 years ago, my Twitter handle, which I never was much of a
Mm.
Twitterer, but the Twitter handle was Renters Die Broke. I have no animosity towards renters. You don't look down at renters. You don't feel, like they're lesser than. My goal and objective is for everyone who is capable of successfully becoming a homeowner to help them bridge that gap at the right time to become a homeowner. Because the reality, you've probably heard me say these numbers 10,000 times and get annoyed by it. According to the 2019 survey of consumer finances, so before COVID, before home values increased 40%, homeowners had 44 times greater net worth than renters. Average net worth of a renter is $6,000. Average burial expenses are like $7,000 or $8,000. So legitimately, if you die as a renter, the average renter, obviously there are rich renters out there who've done a great job saving. But the average renter dies without enough money to properly bury them, and they're a burden to their family. And there's reasons for that. It's not magic, and it's not to say that everyone at all times, if you're a renter, you should run out and buy a home.
Right.
But there are things that you should be working on to become the person who can successfully become a homeowner.
Yes.
Because real estate
Yes.
is not a get rich quick scheme. It is the absolute best get rich slow scheme,
Yes.
because you have to have a roof over your head for your lifetime, which your
Mhm.
adult life, if you say from 20 to 80 for most people, across 60 years, you have to put a roof over your head. If you can use leverage and paying down principal, borrowing, using other people's money, there's so many things that go into this for you that it takes care of itself over time, and it builds the wealth for you. And most importantly, at some point you arrive at a freedom point where you no longer have a mortgage, and the only cost of the shelter for you is taxes and insurance, which a
Mhm.
renter never gets to arrive at that point.
Right. Yeah, that was something that I had on my notes, that renters die broke term, because I think, people around my age are just sort of the millennial, what's like trendy now, like the Grant Cardones, right? It's like buying is sort of like owning a house is a liability, and it's a waste of your money. And, he makes it sound like it's so easy to just sort of, like I'm buying doors and it's, my tenants are paying for the mortgage itself. Right. And so it's just a bit generic, and it's a little ambiguous, and it's kind of hard it's a big concept for me to understand. And you and I have talked about this a lot because, most people like, we say it a lot, right? Like somebody buying a house is probably going to be the biggest financial decision they're going to go through, in their lifetime, quite honestly, besides probably who they marry, almost in a sense. And then most people probably may never get into a position where they are becoming an actual owner of a property and they have tenants in there. Like that's another big step to kind of step into. So that concept of then, okay, well then owning that house and building up equity over time, like for me was something that I understood from very like, that it's the same sort of deal for me. Like my family doesn't have a whole lot of money getting thrown around, right? We're sort of middle class, but the people that are doing well, like, some of my, elderly grandparents and some of the other people, like the correlation was always they were involved in real estate. That was always the same sort of thing that I noticed. And it's not even like, because some people are like, well, like the equity is just there. And of course, like your net worth goes higher, but it's the ability and the almost like the strategic things that you can do with building up equity over time that then allows you to maybe take a loan against that asset to either pay for your lifestyle or go and acquire another property or go and do something and start a business. There's so many things that allow you to do that. But essentially your interest rate when you're renting is 100%, right? Like there's nothing you don't have anything that you can do with that. But when you are then acquiring a piece of an asset and you're growing that equity and that piece over time, that gives you so much more, I wouldn't even say flexibility, but just decision making and almost like power with your money, which essentially is what like I'm trying to do with this, right? It's just having people be intentional with the decisions that they're making and empowering somebody to then, use these different pieces that are out there to ultimately enhance your life. Like that's all what we're after, right? It's just being able to play this game just at a higher level. I mean, that's really what it's all going to come down to.
So for you and for anyone watching this show who does not own a home, burn this into your brain. There is no such thing as a 30-year fixed rent. That is the crux of the issue here.
Interesting.
So today, at highly elevated prices in a high cost area like Southern California, talked to a gentleman last week. He's in a very fortunate situation that he's rented his place for 7 years. He got it below market. Landlord has never raised his rent. So he's paying $2,100 a month for something that should rent for $4,000.
Goodness gracious.
For him to go buy something equivalent, it would be about a $5,500 payment. So he asked me, he goes, am I crazy to even think about buying? Because I'm going to be paying $3,400 more a month. And right now I can save a bunch of money. I go, I think you are crazy to buy a new residence and to give up that rental. I said, let's remember, there's nothing binding that landlord to never raising your rent. He could sell the place. He could get hit by a bus. His heirs could come in and go, hey, you know what? Rent should be $4,000.
Yeah.
So you are, depending upon his good grace to keep you at $2,100. But it's been there for 7 years. You say you have a great relationship, unlikely to change. So let's look at buying an investment property, kind of like what you were talking about, and putting that money to work for you and still enjoy the really nice place at a below market price. Because what that will do, again, we're paying down principal, we're fixing the cost. So let's say that landlord was charging him what he should charge, $4,000, and he buys and he's paying $5,500 for something equivalent or even slightly inferior. You go, well, that's a bad deal. He's giving up $1,500 a month.
Right.
You go, okay, well, if his rent goes up 3% a year, which it's likely to, over the long haul, it has. So now we're talking an extra $120 a year. So in 12 years, he gets to parity, if not sooner. 10 to 12 years, $5,500. And 20 years later, you're paying $1,500 more to rent. 30 years later, by about the time that mortgage is paid off, you're paying double what you would pay on the mortgage. But the important part is that $1,500 difference, a big portion of that at his price point, over $1,000 a month, was going towards principal.
Right.
So the actual additional cost was about $500 to own, but $1,000 of that $1,500 difference was going towards principal. So you're saving it in a non-liquid savings account that's sitting over there. And that's why we say you need to have a long-term time horizon. It's not everyone should buy at all times. Younger people like yourself, you have uncertainty in your relationship. You would like to find someone to marry at some point, and that's going to change things. So you'd like to possibly have the flexibility of being a renter right now. Job wise, you're self-employed and responsible for yourself and location independent. You can go anywhere you want. Not everyone has that benefit. They may be here in California and say, hey, I can get a $200,000 a year job, but I got to go to New York. Well, if you bought a house, you're kind of locked into that. If you buy a one-bedroom condo as a single man and you end up getting married, that's not going to last, or it's not going to work very long. So there are other things you have to take into account. When we first saw this idea, or people like being militantly against owning homes, it was around 2008, 2009, 2010. We see the big downturn. So, okay, real estate is cyclical. So at the bottom of a cycle, there are people who jump up and start screaming, this is stupid. Don't buy it. It costs way more to buy than rent in these high cost areas. Say, okay, let's follow that logic. If you are not going to buy, who do you have to be, or what do you have to do to make sure that you end up with a similar net worth to homeowners that have a 44 times greater net worth than renters? Most renters do not have the discipline to save and invest aggressively and competently to arrive at the same point. I will tell you, go out to Reddit, There are little forums of engineers who sit there and tell you that it is stupid to own a home. These are the guys that wear the same white t-shirt and khakis every day, who are happy renting a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom apartment. And that's not to say bad things about it. I'm not saying they're a bad person, but there's a certain mindset there. They live an austere lifestyle. They're not, going out buying expensive cars. They're good with numbers. They're disciplined. And they go, look, I got my spreadsheet right here. All I got to do is I save 22% of my salary. I invest it over here in my 401k. It compounds, tax-free. And if I get a 9.4% return, which over the last 12 years, I've got 10.3, I'm going to arrive way wealthier than if I were to take my $20,000, $50,000, $100,000 as a down payment. So absolutely 100% true. The numbers that one of these people can put together for you and show you long-term historical averages, including home price appreciation, can show you that you can arrive even wealthier as a renter. You have to ask yourself, am I that disciplined? Will I save the additional money in the early going? Because later on, renting is going to cost me more. But am I disciplined enough to save? Am I competent enough to invest and get that return? We talk about average returns in the market. Most people don't achieve that. There are super achievers who get big Warren Buffett type returns. Right. And most people do the exact wrong thing. They jump into crypto when it's at a peak in late 21, 22. They sell when it starts is down 50% and don't get any recovery. So most people do not have that engineer mindset where they're very good with numbers, very disciplined and competent, comfortable investors.
That's interesting.
So no one should tell you can't achieve it as a realtor, right? But you better, those things better apply to you and your abilities.
And it's almost like getting rich sort of like on paper, like on a spreadsheet, like on that paper. Yeah, you're getting rich, but like there's something different about like actual owning like a physical real asset, like real estate. Like that is, it's the combination of like getting rich in theory, like on paper, like, yeah, if I'm following this model and the model's great until either shit hits the fan or something's, something gets, a little bit played with or something's a little bit different. And then it's also like the lifestyle that comes along with it is like, well, acquiring, a home I can then, build a family into, it could, be part of like, supplementing my lifestyle, all that good stuff. So that's a really interesting, and I appreciate your transparency on it, because I think people, when they hear that and they're like, buying a home is a bad decision, it's a very surface level sort of take to it. And it's like a headline sort of thing that they kind of jump at. And then they don't necessarily read into it any deeper. And they don't necessarily think about how it applies to you and your situation specifically. Because that's always my big thing behind this is like my investment portfolio or strategy or my, way that I'm going to approach my work, how I invest, all these different things. It's going to make sense to me. And it doesn't need to make sense to anybody else, but like, that's the whole idea behind it, is finding your path and speaking to, honestly, like that's something why, I really enjoy just being around you so much, because like I get to ask these questions that I'm curious about. And like, that's the cool thing about working specifically with someone like you. And I don't think everybody in the loan business is like that, but you are like truly, genuinely I'm not going to classify you as like a financial advisor, but like talking to you is like, it feels like I'm talking to like, how to actually understand like my finances on just like, on a vast level and how everything plays into account, rather than just like, I'm going to get you into a home because I want my commission so I can go buy a speedboat, something like that. You know what I mean? Like that's what it usually feels like in this industry sometimes.
A couple of things. The vast majority of our clients don't have any financial advisors in their lives.
Right.
They don't have enough assets in their mind to go get an advisor. So maybe there's someone that administers the 401k at their work that they could talk to, or there was a luncheon where you could sit and lunch and learn.
Yeah.
So a couple of things that come out of that is we do advise, and we do try and show folks over time what is the difference in the impact. What I will say is you can go wrong with housing. Our average buyer on the young side is 30, on the high side, 45. Very rarely get them under 30. And we occasionally will get a 50, 55, 60-year-old moving up, buying a dream home, moving down, whatever, buying a second home. 30 to 45-year-olds in 2008, when everything went haywire, they were 15 to 30.
Right.
A lot of them saw their parents lose homes, family members lose homes. So, the mindset of that generation is different, and different in a good way, good and bad. So they have some negative connotations to home ownership because they don't really understand what all went into that and how that happened. But from 2000 to 2005, we threw away the prior generation's wisdom of buy your home, pay it off over time. If you get a chance to reduce your interest rate, do that, but don't keep going resetting to a 30-year loan. Don't keep taking cash out.
Yeah.
So between 2000 and 2005, I had weird stuff where people would, soon as their home would go up $100,000, cool, give me 100 grand. I'm going to buy a boat. I'm going to pay off all this debt that I ran up. And then they would come back the next year. Hey, my home went up another 100 grand. I ran up my debt again. I needed to do this. We don't see that nearly as much anymore. There's always going to be a small subset of the population that is bad with money and undisciplined,
right.
but it was an epidemic at that time. I'm not saying it was everyone, but 20 to 30% of people were just crazy about home equity and how they use that. So if you were to do that today, if over the last few years, as home values went up, you come and you say, hey, give me max cash out, which back in the day, that was 100%. You get 100% of the value of your home fairly easily at pretty decent terms.
Wow.
Now, anything over 80% is going to be egregious. And most people just go, yeah, no thanks.
Right.
So we don't have that because most of our borrowers remember the downside and the bad sides of it. But it is possible. If you just keep saying, hey, I'm going to refinance every time rates drop and I'm going to go back to a 30-year because it lowers my payment the most, versus saying I'm 3.5 years into this loan, maybe I should take a 26.5-year loan term. So my monthly payment savings isn't as much, but I'm not stretching that back out. We want to keep an eye on a freedom point where at some point you are not going to want to work anymore. And you want to make that mortgage payment go away. So as long as you cover your taxes and insurance, you have shelter at a much lower cost. And heaven forbid, worst case, you can take out a reverse mortgage at some point. That's sort of a fallback. It's an additional safety net for the person that's paid off their home. But if you just keep pushing that off further in the future. So you said something that was really important. Again, that generation is also the first generation that has ever heard a message that owning a home is stupid. It's a liability. It ties you down. It's more expensive than renting. You give up your freedom.
Right.
Now, Grant Cardone, remember how Grant Cardone makes money. And when I say this to you, remember how Grant Cardone makes money, remember how Josh Lewis makes money. I hear this all the time. He was you want people to buy homes because that's how you make money, is doing loans. I say, let's look at this. I've done this for 27 years. I'm a one-trick pony. There's nothing else I can do. So I am trapped in this industry. And I'm lucky that I'm good enough and have a big enough client base that when times are bad and volume is 50% of what it was 2 years ago, I still make a nice living.
Right.
When we get to a period of time where we have massive tailwinds, like we had in 2020, 2021, we get to work really long hours and make an awful lot of money. I don't ever have to talk someone into buying, borrowing, getting a loan.
Right.
When they decide that all the things that we talked about, their relationship situation is stable, their child situation is stable, their job situation is stable, they have good credit, they have a down payment, and they've decided they want to be in one location for the next 5+ years, preferably 7+. I am here to help advise you do that as well as possible. So circling back, how does Grant Cardone make money? Grant Cardone makes money buying multi-million-dollar apartment buildings using other people's money. It's hard to get other people's money when they have bought their own home. So it's really easy to say, this is a terrible idea. Let me have your money so I can invest it buying these doors. I'm going to make a big return off of it, and you'll get a decent return over there as well. So you're going to be one of my tenants your entire life because I just talked you out of buying a home yourself.
Wow.
But I'm telling you, this is a great deal because there's always people that need to rent, but ignore that I just told you to be one of those renters.
Man, I mean, you and I have talked about this before, but you've never laid it out so succinctly like that. That's quite interesting. Goodness gracious. Okay, you touched on it a little. Yeah, go ahead.
Noah, those numbers can work. But again, are you that guy? Are you that disciplined person, good with numbers, who is comfortable not owning a home and living in an apartment or renting someone else's home for your entire life?
Right, 100%. And when we talk about like freedom or what freedom is or financial freedom and all that good stuff, it's like not being like tied to or like I don't need anything from anybody. And if I am actively investing or if my money and my capital is tied up in this thing that I really don't have a whole lot of control over, I don't know how much freedom that really gives you at that point.
Yeah.
That's interesting. You touched on it a little bit, like, and this was a question that I wanted to just, I know you can, just rattle it off in the back of your hand, but like when somebody is thinking about becoming mortgage ready, like what are some of just the very basics that they kind of need to be aware of, right? From like a credit standpoint, a down payment standpoint, a liquidity kind of cash on hand. Like what are just like the basics that you would run somebody through to just like, okay, this is my kind of checklist that I can sort of get through before I, start to approach this conversation?
So a lot of those 25 to 45-year-old first-time buyers are getting a lot of their information from YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, lots of content out there.
Right.
In my industry, more than 80% of people that do what I do are morons. You should not listen to them. You should do the opposite of what they say. And just ask them difficult questions and watch them stumble, stutter, or go into salesperson mode. So what happens is I get calls all the time from people, hey, I'm okay. My credit's 585. I've watched several videos. I know with FHA, you're okay down to 580. And what I would say is we talked about, are you stable in your life, in your finances, in your job, in your relationship? If you have a 585 credit score, you are not. You have not achieved stability in your life. I know what a 585 credit score looks like. And I can tell you that for some of those people, the problems were in the past. Have one right now. The lady went through a divorce 2 years ago. So I totally get it. And I can see that she is rebuilding her credit, but it's going to be 6 to 12 months before she's, say, a 660, and probably 2 years before she's a 750, unless she goes back and aggressively works to pay off and potentially delete some of the negative stuff that's on there. She has to build a new credit history so that the credit scoring algorithms can see, okay, that was a blip and now things are better.
Right.
So you are going to pay so much more with a sub 640 credit score that I would almost say, if I have a client with a 620 and we can kind of quantify it and go, okay, I will say it is very rare that we do a loan for someone with a sub 620 credit score. We say 640 will get you good terms on an FHA, 680 will get you the best. 680 will get you the best FHA terms, will get you okay terms on a conventional loan. So really, this blows people's minds. The median credit score in the United States right now, what would be your guess? What an average, half of the people are above and half of the people in the United States are below. What do you think a median credit score is?
My initial reaction is like 600.
It's about 730.
Really? Okay.
But you hear people all the time, I'm working hard. I'm going to get I really want that 700 credit score. I want people to look at me that I'm a good credit risk.
Yeah.
And for the most part, if you look at the bell curve, probably 90% of the problems creditors have are with people in the bottom 10% of that distribution. So you're under 600, you're going to be a problem for your creditors. At 700, probably not, but your average, it could go either way.
That's interesting. Okay. Yeah.
So really, and Fannie Mae is making this change right now. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the FHFA, who the government dictates with them. This is a little bit of woke BS government stuff that they're doing, but the loan level price adjustments right now, 740 and above credit score gets the best terms on any loan through Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac.
Got it. Okay.
They're changing that. We're getting new tiers. We're getting a 741 to 760, 761 to 780, and 781 plus. So now you got to be 781 to get the best terms.
Wow.
But here's the kicker. I don't have a problem with that. I get it. Loan level price adjustments, which is what these are called, are meant to compensate Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac for the additional risk that a borrower represents by going down the scale in credit score or up the scale in loan to value. So it's intuitive that someone with a 640 credit score and 3% down is a much bigger risk than someone with a 740 credit score and 40% down, right?
Of course, right, of course.
So if I handed you this grid and said, draw these adjustments, I think a seventh grade math student could figure out what should that look like. Well, what they're doing, we have new high tiers for the best credit borrowers, and they will all get worse terms than what they get right now. Now on the low end of the scale, we're going to improve all those terms. So essentially we're taxing people with good credit to improve the terms for people with bad credit. And if you're getting the feeling I think the government is stupid, it's because I think the government is stupid. If we go back to the 90s, this is the same bullshit that both Republican Party members and Democrats pushed in the 90s, saying if home ownership is good, it leads to families staying together, better school districts, less crime, all those things. We need to incentivize this, versus saying that all of those things are an outcome of having a population who have achieved home ownership. Let's force people into home ownership, and then magically the rest of that cascade will fall into place.
Right.
So when we look at that, what happens? when you incentivize people on the low end of the credit scale, instead of incentivizing them to get their credit scores better, to become a better credit risk, when you charge them less for being a bad credit risk, you are incentivizing bad outcomes. Now, is this as bad as the things that were in place in the late 90s and early 2000s? It's not nearly as bad, but it's stupid. Because if we sit here and say, are women likely to have worse credit scores than men? No, technically, I mean, if we look and we break out that median, I think the median is a little higher for women. So are we helping underserved women? Is there anything unique? And we can say that if you look at credit score distributions, non-whites have lower credit score distributions other than Asians. Asians have higher credit scores than Caucasians. Non-whites in general are a little bit lower. So you can sit here and say, well, we're helping people of color. And you go, okay, but are we helping them? This was the same logic that we used in the 90s, pushing them into homeownership when they haven't become the person who can successfully be a homeowner. And I have clients of color all the time that come to me with 740, 750, 780 credit scores.
Yeah.
So why are we saying let's tax that person of color to subsidize this person of color? It's an arbitrary distinction. And I don't think that homeownership is important to building wealth, short-term and long-term generational wealth.
Yeah.
We should incentivize it, but we should incentivize that through education, through showing people how to maximize their credit scores, how to save more money. We don't teach basic economics. I mean, household economics. Like, you don't need to know supply demand curves, that type of stuff. You need to know, how do I balance my checkbook? What goes into my credit score? What happens when I go to community college for a semester and there's 4 booths out there giving credit cards to kids that don't understand how it works? Like, that's the education that we need to be giving people. I am 100% in favor of helping those who have achieved that level of being able to get into a home. Like, if you look, we haven't lowered, we say you have to come up with a minimum of 3% down. We haven't said, let's come up with a 0 down program for those people. That is actually the biggest hurdle, is coming up with that down payment, especially in high cost areas. But what's more predictive of loss to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac? It's not the down payment. Does 3% really predict that or protect them from losing money? No. So if we say it's okay at 3, we should say it's okay at 0 for those who have achieved a certain level of credit worthiness. So give the education to show people how to get there, give incentives to make it easier. I think everyone should have a good path to homeownership as long as they have achieved a certain level of stability in their life where they can successfully become a homeowner.
Goodness. Yeah. Your commitment to education is something that I truly, really, really admire. I mean, it's a big inspiration behind me starting Systems of Wealth, because it's just like, these conversations are not talked about, especially for me, like being an entrepreneur. Like, I'm so close to my money. I have to be, because it's just, like you said, like, I'm being self-employed, like I'm responsible for myself. And I think we find ourselves like, the youth, it's interesting, right? Because like we are so quick to take loans out to go get an education, right? And in that sense, the asset, I guess, is sort of yourself, or like the education that you're acquiring is kind of in that sense, like that's the asset. But then we talk about taking out a loan to go and acquire a house, and then everything gets all screwy, right? And so like, it's interesting because at such a young age, we're so quick to then take out a loan, and like that's the normal thing that people push, and then it becomes, now we're in a little bit more of a financial stable position, and then taking out a loan to go and acquire an asset, it's like all of a sudden it's crazy and that gets up in the air. But I think like that, having that conversation, that distinction has been really interesting for me to think about, is like, it's the same sort of almost mechanism or the event of taking out a loan to go and acquire X, to go and acquire something. But in the student loan example, for the most part, nobody's ever going to be able to handle that amount of debt that they're taking on, or be able to out earn the ability to pay that down and then experience a freedom where they don't have that hanging over their head or their interest. And if they do that so early, then they may never be in a position where they are able to build up enough of a down payment to go in and then acquire a house, which is like what we're trying to get people to, which is going to ultimately build your wealth up over time. So like that, I find that distinction really interesting. I know we're limited on time, but I want to just dig into it just a little bit with you. Like the little bit more of an advanced sort of like then investing in real estate. Can you just walk me through a little bit? Because you and I haven't gotten to dig too, but I know you did some fixes and flips, and I know you own some apartment buildings. You got some of that. But can you walk me through just sort of your initial break into investing in real estate and some of the experiences you've had, some of the mistakes that you've had, kind of where you're at with it right now, sort of just your expert inside level kind of feel towards, actually then becoming like an investor in real estate itself?
If I still had my notebooks from 1996, 1997, Josh, I had a client who was buying 4-unit buildings here in Huntington Beach and Costa Mesa,
Okay.
in the low income parts of Huntington Beach and Costa Mesa. They still weren't cheap. He was buying them. This will tell you it was a long time ago. It was in the 90s. High 200s, low 300s, and they needed $50,000 to $80,000 worth of work. And when they were done, they were worth $450,000.
Nice, very nice.
So I sat here and I said, before I buy a house, I want to acquire 4 of those. And had I done that, those apartments are all close to $2 million right now.
Dude, goodness gracious.
And 20 years down the line, if I had followed my own advice and just paid them down and refinanced for shorter terms and lower interest rates, the payments would have gone down consistently throughout that 25 years as rates went down. And rents would have gone up, and they would have been long since paid off. And so I would have about $8 million of real estate, and rents on those is probably say $7,000 to $8,000 a month they're bringing in. So 4 of them, you'd have 30-something thousand dollars a month of income before taxes, before your expenses in terms of property taxes, hazard insurance, maintaining the place. Say you'd have $20,000. So $8 million on the net worth side of the ledger, $20,000 a month
Free
of
cash
income.
flow. Goodness.
I didn't do it. I got an awesome opportunity. My step-grandpa had a client who was selling a condo down on 20th Street. I bought it for $197,000. I sold it for $715,000. So we did okay.
Holy
we did not do that poorly on that.
No, sir.
So kind of to walk through that, I bought that in 98, 2 years before I got married.
That was your very first, that was the first purchase.
And we left it. I stayed home and lived with my dad. And rented that out.
You did? All right.
There were tenants in it when I bought it, and they wanted to stay there. So cool, you guys stay there. Told them about 2 months before I got married, hey, here's 60 days. You guys, we're gonna come in, and we gutted it, made it cute, wonderful. My wife and I lived there the first 3 years we were married. And then we started going, we're going to have kids. And you may say, Josh, you don't have any kids. Well, we never had the kids, but we decided that, hey, we're going to have kids, and we want a house. We want a dog. We did get dogs.
Yeah, of course.
But we bought our house. And so what I did at that time, it had gone up to 355, I think is what it appraised for. We took out $100,000 and used that as the down payment on our current house.
Nice.
Paid 580 for that. It went up to about $1 million. And then when the market went down, it went down. I don't think it ever really went under 800, maybe 750, 775. So at its worst, it was still worth 200,000 more than we paid for it. Today, it's worth 3 times what we paid for it.
Love it.
And I don't care, because I'm going to own that house my entire life. And in California, after you turn 55, you are able to transfer your property taxes with you. So there's a chance that with that change in the law that I might move, but more likely we're going to own that home my entire life. So along the way, I'm just trying to think of everything that we acquired in 2010, when everything was in the tank. With my in-laws, we acquired a condo in Rancho Mirage. We paid $260,000 for it, probably put 125 into it. It's like a brand new house. So we're into it for 385. Model match to ours just sold for 799. So again, and in that time, based off of our down payment and aggressively paying it down, we use it as a vacation rental. We use those rents to pay it down. And we've paid it off. So again, my wife and I are not the only owners of the property, but it's a chunk of equity there.
Of course.
Around that same time, 2010, when everything was in the tank, I bought a 4-unit building with my flipping partner in Long Beach. And I called her up and I said, hey, I got an opportunity to buy a 4-plex. It's the most amazing deal I've ever seen. She goes, cool. How much is it? I said, they want $599 for it. She goes, that's crazy. That thing's worth about $475. I go, yeah, open your ears and listen here. The seller was stuck on getting his number of $599. He owned it free and clear. He had a problem. He inherited it from his parents. He lived in 1 unit. His buddies lived in the other 3 units. So his buddies like to sit around and drink and smoke weed, and they didn't so much like paying their friend the rent. And being a good buddy, he was not able to evict them. So he said, if you become the owner here, you can collect rent from these folks. And I said, that's a good point. So his rents were way below market. We knew we had upside in the rents. What he was offering was pay me 10% down. So it was a 60. No, we did give him 15% down. So we put like $100,000 down. He financed $500,000, $3,000 a month payment, no interest. So the $3,000 a month goes towards that 500,000. So we bought in 2010. I believe it is 4th of July 3/4 of July is out. So 2.5 years, it will be paid for.
All right. So you still have that in the portfolio. You still have
Still
that.
have that.
Oh, I love it.
And she and I bought that in a self-directed IRA.
Okay.
So we pay no taxes on the income, no taxes on anyone else paying that down.
Love it.
We collect it's it's a hair shy of $7,000 a month rent on that property. The taxes are $600 or $700 a month. Other maintenance and others, it costs us about $1,200. And then you've got the mortgage payment right now of $3,000, so $4,200. It brings in just about $2,500 for the two of us to split every month.
Awesome.
Now, in 2 years, 2.5 years, when that's paid off,
yeah,
now we're both going to have $2,500 a month in our self-directed IRAs to invest however we want every month. I don't do anything, so I'll be 53 and have at least 12 years before retirement where I want that money. So what are we talking? $30,000 a year towards $360,000. If I get no return on that, we'll just sit there on a property that's free and clear, should appreciate. If it goes up 3% over those 12 years, should be worth a third more than what it is worth now, which is like $1.1 million. So it's doubled from when we bought it. And I didn't even care about that. I'm like, I don't care. Don't care if it goes up. I know what rents are going to do. We talk about, should you fix your housing payment? Should you be a renter? I knew what rents were going to do. I don't care what the value of that property is.
Yes.
Because we will probably own that the day I die.
Right.
Why would I kill that golden goose that lays $2,500 of eggs for me every month?
You got your hand on the jewel. Yeah, 100%. So that's part of my investment portfolio. I have a self-directed, I haven't done anything with yet. I think I'm probably sitting on 18, 19, maybe 20 grand in there right now that I just haven't done with anything yet. I'm just continuing to kind of stack cash.
Ethereum.
Yeah, I got
now is the time, my friend. Now is the time.
I know you got to jump at the top of the hour. So my last question, I think I've been recently wrapping these up with this last question. I think this would be you'd have an interesting take on it, but how do you define wealth? What's your definition of wealth? What does that mean to you when you hear that word? How does that mean? What does that mean for you in your life?
Having more than you need. And what is need? We all define it differently. I have friends that are crazy. They need to lease a new car every 2 years. Right. They need a bigger, better house. I will say I'm going to be 50 in 6 months. And my perspective from 40 to 50 is different. Forget 30 to 50. It's very different. Right. And I sit here and I go, pretty much have everything I need. What do I want? I want to get my house paid off so that we don't have that overhead. Would like to, I told you, and I'm throw this out here, not to say like this will require a big commitment and return over the next 6 to 7 years. But a mentor of mine, of yours, Perry Marshall, his mindset is there's something bad coming down the pike around 2027-ish, and you should accumulate 10 million liquid before then. Yep. So that is my goal and my objective. And the good thing about that is if I do what I'm doing today, I will not get there. So it says I have to do different things. Yes. So what does $10 million do for you? It's different things for different people. And that number doesn't have to be that number. Right. But say, if you look at a point of saying, I don't want to ever have to think about money. I'm simple. I don't go on European vacations. I drive a 2017 Toyota Tundra. It's a badass truck. About every 5 years, I like to get a new one. I like to put a sweet stereo in it. I like to put some wheels on it, but I'm not going out and buying a Mercedes. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So in general, I'm a simple man. A lot of people would look at what I have and go, easy for you to say, you've got some really cool stuff. But I don't look and go, well, I want a $3 million house. I want a $180,000 car. I don't want any of that. What I want is no headaches and freedom for my wife and I to do whatever we want to do. So a goal for us is to hit the road and just road trip. We like driving, we like going, we like seeing places, and we like taking our dog with us. So it's easier driving than it is flying. So I need some time freedom to get that. You know very well what I don't have right now in my life is time freedom. So where am I at I am at the poverty level when we talk about time wealth. Right. So what is wealth? Wealth is having my needs met with much more free time than I have right now. So from that perspective, I would not consider myself wealthy. So as we're designing this business, any other businesses that I am in, the goal is to get freedom where my wife and I have zero worries about money. and we
Mm-hmm.
can do what we want. That doesn't mean go crazy.
Wow.
It doesn't mean eat at Morton's every night or
Of
go to
course.
Mastro's. It's just, you don't, here's a simple thing. Like, this is dumb, and I don't know that this mindset would ever go away, but people talk about inflation. Inflation is crazy. I go to the Habit a couple of days a week for lunch. It's literally in Southern California, place is called the Habit. When I started going there 6-7 years ago, my salad with double steak on the salad was like $13.95, drinks
Okay.
$2.45. So you're
Yeah.
like, tax everything
Out the
16 and
door.
change at the
Right.
door. So we get a patch of inflation. I look up about a year or two and they're like, goodness gracious, it's like $18.85 for this. I'm like, that is almost $20 just to go to lunch. This is silly. Well, I walk in January 1 and they said, hold my beer. We're going to show you what the bill is. It is just a couple of pennies shy of $21.
I
So I think, and maybe I'm crazy, and maybe when you never arrive at this point, I think when you are truly wealthy, you don't think about that. You're like, it doesn't change my life whether I pay $16 or $21.
right.
So I think when you're trying to achieve wealth, you need to focus on those things.
Yeah.
Once you've achieved it, you can go, I would rather pay $16, but I don't care if I have to pay $21.
Right. It's choices, it's options, it's freedom, it's the ability to do what you want that means the most to your lifestyle. I love that definition. And I think you and I share a very similar sentiment. I think that's why you and I are aligned on so many of these similar things that we talked about today, because, it's just, well, a lot of my way that I perceive wealth and life and business and real estate and all of this stuff is a big part of you. So again, I just want to say thanks for taking the time to jump on. I know your time is extremely valuable, so I really, really appreciate it. You are very active with your content and publishing a lot of this education. If people want to learn more or just engage with you, hear more about sort of your philosophy and what you're talking about, where can people just continuously, engage and consume your content?
So the biggest and best place is the podcast, The Educated Homebuyer. We have a YouTube channel for it. If you like watching your podcasts on YouTube, we do it in video. It is posted on YouTube. So go out there, watch and subscribe. It is on all of the major platforms, Apple, Spotify, wherever you consume podcasts. We are working on building our internet presence apart from that. Every week, you know, Noah, one of my good friends and business partners, realtor Jeb Smith, he's got 70,000 followers on his YouTube channel. Every Wednesday from 5 to 7, we are live answering questions live. So every week, 2 hours. If you have a question, show up there. But those are the big ones. We're going to be working on building out my channel as well as short form stuff, Instagram, TikTok, that stuff. But really, I don't think that housing and real estate is great for short form. Short form is sort of the trap to pull people in and get them to spend at least 10 to 12 minutes listening, if not the full long form 30-40 minute podcasts where we do deep dives on stuff.
Yep.
But if you have questions, if you're unsure, one of my biggest sayings is numbers never lie. People do. So if you have a question, should I do this or should I do that? If you're good with a spreadsheet, crack it out and go through it yourself. If you're not, get with a trusted advisor and work your way through it. If you know how to lay out the numbers and properly account for everything, it will lead you in the right direction.
I love it. And I'll be sure to link all that stuff here in the description of this episode, just so anybody else, looking for those resources, feel free to check that out. Again, Josh, really appreciate your time. To all my builders out there, I salute you. Appreciate you guys. Thank you for your time, effort, energy, and attention. And I will see you guys all in the next episode.